All right, I'm going to make a. This video is about Christianity and violence. And no, I'm not saying Christianity is responsible for the most violence in history or any bullshit like that. It's true that Christianity has some stuff to say on violence and so on. But there's two versions of Christianity, basically. There's the C.S. Lewis fighting man's Christianity, and then there's the hippie Christianity, basically. Now, it might be true that the early church was started by hippies, but for it to function for society as a whole, it had to be adopted by the fighting men. And I mean fighting. I mean stabbing, slashing, crushing, fist fighting, soldiers. Not soldiers of God, I'm a warrior, quote unquote, sort of like I pray every day and that's my fight and so on, but actual violence. In a very George Orwell style quote way of civilization sleeps soundly at night because of rough men manning the walls as night watchmen. The early Christian church might have been hippies, but they could only spread things peacefully because of the Pax Romana, or the Roman peace. As soon as things started falling apart, what made Eastern Rome, the Eastern Roman Empire, survive for 1,000 years after the fall of the city of Rome is that the soldiers adopted Christ and they incorporated Christ into their soldiering activities without destroying their actual literal soldier activities. So they didn't necessarily rape, loot, and pillage, but they would certainly kill the evil ones and the invaders and the unjust and so on. So for Christianity to work, you need people capable of violence to defend it. Now, why do we defend it? Maybe it's for the hippies to count angels on the head of a pin and so on. Maybe it's for their sake in the end. But when times are real and our people are being invaded, raped, and murdered, so much of modern Christianity is counting angels on the head of a pin. Like, was Jesus always existing of his own will, or was he the first creation of the Father? And like that's their big topic, and like they never address the moral realities of real life, in any foundational sense with the basics of existence in this world. And then they tell us, you weren't made for this world, as if we're not part of it. And as if it doesn't matter what happens to us in this world. That's not my Christianity. That is not my Christianity. Now, maybe I want them to be able to do that peacefully and successfully and enjoy things from doing that. But ultimately, it's going to rely on people who, like me, recognize the need to do violence against the wicked. To destroy them so they can't do it to others, or to hurt them enough to convince them not to try to do it again. And it's literally that simple. So basically, my personal trajectory is I was a fighting man. I learned to beat up bullies. Kind of became a little bit of a bully at times myself, so it wasn't fully integrated or anything like that. Made a mistake with a woman I love. Learned to fight myself spiritually and mentally and emotionally. A very harrowing experience of destroying my ego and killing it every chance I got. But it would keep popping up, failure after failure. Meek and humble and afraid of violent people because I was unwilling to recognize my own capacity for violence anymore and my own success at it. And then I get to start seeing all these atrocities of things people are doing that are way worse than anything I've done. And the old fighting man in me rises once more. So I'm not saying I'm going to be a brutal savage and narcissistic atheist or something. I've learned a lot from my meek and humble phase, and I guess it was necessary. But I'm picking back up the fighting man's mentality and spirit for the sake of the spiritual, to attempt to protect those who are better at the spirit so that they can find peace in this life on some level. To protect those who can't protect themselves because they're not willing to, or they're unable to physically, or they're not old enough to, and so on. This esoteric, autism-driven, finer details of theoretical stuff is only possible or reasonable if someone is in a safe space. And I don't mean the woke safe space, I mean an actual safe space where they aren't seeing constant rape and murder. The people that deal with the real shit, and I don't mean like just real stuff, I mean the absolute crap that is human evil on humans. They go to the foundations of human existence and basic morality again. They're the real Christians as far as I'm concerned. The theoretical hippies of Christianity, they might be real Christians too, actually, I guess. Maybe. But the early Christians could only afford to spread Christianity through martyrdom because of a peaceful society that was intact through Rome in the first place. And as soon as the society became Christian and had to take responsibility for the survival of its people against invaders, the soldiers picked it up and they changed from being purely barbaric to some combination of brutal man and hippie at the same time. A barbarian and a hippie at the same time, to use my language in a way. Body and spirit. What can I say? Discipline, masculinity, not being thugs, but being very rough men, but with a moral code that is gentler to the innocent and those who've done no harm to anyone that they know of, and so on. But willing to fight armies, and I don't mean in some sort of like I hallucinate that there's demons and then I pray to Jesus and he sends them away kind of fight. But I mean like a flesh and blood fight against flesh and blood monsters. And the monks exist and they're protected, and maybe they're valuable in their own way. But the knights have to exist in order for the monks to thrive. And we're just seeing the cycle of that play out at this point. Anyways, I've learned what it's like to be a monk. I've known what it's like to be a fighter, a warrior, a knight of sorts. And I'm picking up the mentality and spirit of a fighter once more that I gave up to seek a monk-like situation. And this is not unusual for men. First, you learn the capacity for violence, then you learn to put it away, and then you learn how to take it out and put it away at the right times. Basically, is kind of the journey, as far as I can tell. And that's not special to me. That's something a lot of people who develop into noble, heroic champions of their people through death and danger operate, basically. It's just part of how good people learn to be dangerous to evil. And I'm not going to denigrate those who put their life on the line actually to speak moral truths, at least on the basics. Maybe the exact autistic details of whether Jesus was created by the Father infinitely or he came about of his own will infinitely. You know, maybe that's a little, I don't know why you risk your life for that. You know what I mean? But those who risk their lives to take the hits that would be given to others, like that priest that volunteered to take the death camp position, to take the gas chamber or something, that day instead of a Jewish man in one of the Holocaust camps, is the kind of martyr that I can appreciate because he's actually suffering, not just for the sake of like, oh, I don't want to hit anyone back, but he's suffering because he knows he can't win and he's taking the hits so someone else doesn't have to. And part of it is actually that it does motivate people to fight flesh and blood to flesh and blood harder to protect the one that is the martyr and the innocent victim or would-be victim. It motivates the soldiers or the fighters, the knights, the warriors to genuinely fight harder to protect those two categories. And it's a basic moral foundation that's important here. That's what I respect the most. I've studied the esoteric sort of autistic details of Spurgfests and so on from multiple modern Christians. And honestly, as much as I thought I was getting holy from doing it, I was terrified of a violent person potentially because I was afraid that I couldn't match them, even though my history shows that I'm one of the strongest fighters in my city, basically. And I've taken knives, bullets, cars, drownings, castration attempts, and I was still terrified of someone who could possibly punch me in the face. Even though my history also shows that I can bash the crap out of people that try and punch me in the head. And I win typically when I'm serious. But in my case, it was because I recognized I had done legitimate wrong in a very aggressive manner and wanted to prevent myself from adding to those kinds of problems, which I saw as a potential in me. So I fought myself. But I've succeeded somewhat, made progress in the gentle direction and the long suffering without lashing out direction and so on. But the situation calls for rough men who can face death and deliver harm to purely wicked people for the sake of the innocent and the martyrs and the monks and all those who can't defend themselves. We need heroes, champions, knights, warriors, paladins, crusaders. And our society is crucially lacking those people. So that's why I bang the war drum and try and rally people to great action against the invaders, because they rape and murder us, which is, you know, and they do it to children. And quite frankly, I'm sick of it. It's bad enough. It's death penalty stuff. So I call for the death of those who do it. And that means it has to be enforced. So we need more people ready to enforce punishment on wickedness. Now, wickedness is not just sin or material. It's not just being a little sinful, or it's not just like an autistic detail of like, if you do any sins at all, you go to hell. It's when you basically run towards the devil and Satan and do basically everything you can to support his will and resist God's will. And it's a category of people that embrace evil as opposed to falling into it against their will. They run to evil. They don't try and run away, even if they fall. Or fall backwards even. It's not even falling backwards into evil. It's like you run into it on purpose. That's wicked. And we have to fight those people, flesh and blood to flesh and blood now, for the sake of the innocent, the martyrs, the monks, and everyone else. Whether they're slightly guilty of wrongdoing or pretty guilty of some nasty business. And I don't mean nasty like child rape and murder, but I mean like, you know, like sort of like, if you say America deserved 9/11, that's nasty as hell. And I did that once upon a time. Although my thing was I didn't like the CIA or the deep state, and I thought the government represented the people democratically under Bush and Obama, so you know. So I was like, okay, you know, all I did was I decoupled the deep state from the people in my mind, and then I was like, oh my god, what have I done? I've really disparaged the American people, you know. But like, if someone were to say that, would you save them from a Muslim trying to rape or murder them? And some people might say yes, some people might say no. I would compromise in my regards to that. I would say let them sweat a bit, but prevent them from dying or being raped in the end. Let them taste fear of the people they've been supporting, and then crush the predator in a sort of once burned, twice shy kind of don't touch the hot stove kind of way, except letting them touch the hot stove with their pinky finger instead of putting their face to it, so to speak. little different version of burn. You know, one's kind of a disfiguring, life-changing experience, and the other one just teaches that, you know, doing dumb shit gets you hurt. Because they get a little hurt, not super scarred. So that's my compromise, and that's my position on this, and that's why I'm so serious about this.